News with Sam Donaldson reporting for Frank Reynolds. Tonight, Japan airliner crash lands in San Francisco Bay. All on board survive. New explosions hamper rescue efforts in West Virginia. Guest commentator Ralph Nader looks at the cause and fixes the blame. And from Arlington National Cemetery, a memorial for John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Now, here is Sam Donaldson.
Good evening. Japan Airlines Flight 2 crashed in San Francisco Bay today, but all 107 aboard escaped without serious injury. The DC-8 jet apparently missed the runway on its landing approach because of heavy fog. Details now from ABC's John Davenport in San Francisco.
The 100-ton jet was on a flight from Tokyo. It was on an instrument approach to the San Francisco airport when it hit the fog-shrouded waters 3 miles south of the runway. One witness said the captain saw it at the last minute, that he was too close to the water, gave it power, but was too late. A few passengers screamed, but were soon calmed by the crew. About the only thing suffered by those aboard was wet feet. The jet floundered to a stop 350 feet from a yacht harbor and just missed a tree-studded point jutting out into the water. After the splashdown, the crew quickly inflated 5 life rafts and paddled the passengers ashore. Soon, an armada of small boats and rescue craft rushed to the plane. As the boats and rafts took away the last passengers, water began seeping inside the cabin. Jet fuel from the ruptured wing tanks spewed into the water, but there was no fire. ABC reporter Keith Bonet talked to survivors.
Can you tell me what happened, ma'am?
I heard a cracking noise and the plane hit the water.
How about you, sir? Well, we came in mighty low, and then all of a sudden we were in the water. It was very, very rapid.
Among those rescued were 6 children. One of the passengers said it was a perfect water landing. He said as soon as the plane hit, he could see the water surging through the engines. Another said, "I thought I was going down for the last time. I got out on the wing, into a life raft, and all I got was wet feet." As on the high seas, the last to abandon ship was the captain. Captain Asso directed the rescue operations. Japan Airlines officials were unable to explain the mishap, stating the captain was a very experienced pilot. He refused to comment on the accident. The craft was being guided by radar and radio, a normal procedure in low visibility. ABC reporter Maudel Carey talked to a survivor.
Mr. Martin, you were the first one to see the plane go down. Tell us what happened.
Well, I heard it first of all, and it sounded just like, well, I mean, I knew it was low. I mean, like, seemed like the other airplanes that were coming in. I mean, like I was just sitting there fishing. I had nothing else to do, I guess, but listen to the airplanes. And it seemed like the other ones were coming over the top of the fog, but this one here, I could hear him coming underneath. And when he broke through down below, I watched him come in, and I knew doggone well that he just wouldn't make it. And he come in beautiful. I mean, like he hit the water, I mean, just smooth as you please.
A San Francisco Fire Department official said the no-injury Bay crash was a 1,000,000 to 1 shot. The plane's nose was emblazoned with a large Japanese bird symbolizing good luck. John Davenport, ABC News, San Francisco.
While tragedy was avoided in the crash of that Japan airliner, there is little hope tonight for the waiting families in Mannington, West Virginia. The latest in the coal mine disaster and a guest commentary by Ralph Nader in a moment.
What's the least you can spend for color television and still get an excellent set? Let's start with a heavy-duty chassis. Add the circuitry, connectors, tubes, and solid-state devices. The IF stages. 2 are good, 3 are better. Next, the VHF-UHF tuner assembly and control. A 24,000-volt power source. Automatic gain control, color monitor, automatic color control, noise filter. A big 117 square inch picture tube. A good good-looking cabinet. And you end up with the Emerson 279.95 color television. Spend any less and you'd be better off with black and white. Of course, if you want bigger screens, fancier cabinets, or consoles, well, Emerson makes 18 others. Emerson, you can pay a lot more and end up with a lot less.
2 new underground explosions rocked Mannington No. 9 coal mine today. Together with the fire which burns on unabated, the explosions further reduce the chances that the 78 miners trapped since Wednesday morning will ever be found alive. But rescue workers have not given up. ABC's Don North reports the latest from the disaster scene near Mannington, West Virginia.
Like an erratic volcano, the Llewellyn portal of the mine continued belching smoke most of the day. The new explosions indicated the fire was not abating and was probably spreading. The force of the blasts blew a 20-ton plug out of one of the mine openings and scattered debris for hundreds of feet. Attempts to seal the mine openings will be resumed tonight. At the company store, a controversy was building over safety conditions in the mine before the explosions. Company officials and union representatives vigorously defended the mine's safety record. United Mine Workers Safety Director Lewis Evans reassured newsmen and families rescue efforts would continue.
The question has been raised here as to whether or not thought has been given to sealing this mine. And I want to make it very clear here that this mine is not going to be sealed with our agreement until every possible avenue has been explored to contact these men if they are alive, to effect a rescue or a recovery, whatever it might be.
For the families and friends of the missing 78 men, waiting under the virtually hopeless circumstances was becoming a harrowing ordeal. Listening to the news conference over a speaker, they refused to give up hope but find it harder to hide their feelings.
Well, I think to the best of our knowledge, this is a normal situation. Through the afternoon shift, which are the last people we've been able to talk with, the ventilation was normal on these sections.
Would the gas ratings then be normal at that time?
The gas was normal and within perfectly acceptable limits. To the best of our knowledge, of course, the last knowledge we have were conversation with the people who worked on the afternoon shift before to determine this until we're able to get inside the coal mine.
How about possibility?
All the sections, as well as several miles the atmosphere in the whole. Well, they have oxygen self-contained oxygen breathing out machine and apply soda oxide. Then we come along and continue to repeat this thing.
After 3 days of waiting, the strain had begun to tell on some of the wives, but still they stay on at the company store. It's their last link with 78 men they miss. There is only one small hope for the missing men now. High-speed drills are churning through the ground toward the mine's main tunnel, 800 feet below. If any miners could have sealed themselves off from smoke and flames and survived the explosions, the narrow drill hole could prove a lifeline for them, not for escape, but for supplying fresh air and food. At the present drilling rate, they'll break through Saturday night. Don North, ABC News, number 9 Mine, West Virginia.
The cause of Wednesday morning's explosion is not known, may never be known. But the Interior Department conceded today that the most recent federal inspection of the mine, made last August, uncovered a number of deficiencies, including an excessive amount of highly explosive coal dust in one of the mine's corridors. A spokesman for the department emphasized that the company took measures to correct the deficiencies, and to use the words of the department spokesman, there was nothing to indicate that disaster was imminent. And what can be done to avoid future mine disasters? ABC guest commentator Ralph Nader discusses the problem.
This week, the worst U.S. coal mine disaster in 17 years occurred near Farmington, West Virginia, with a probable loss of 78 lives. Rushing to the scene were officials of the coal company, the United Mine Workers Union, and the U.S. Department of Interior. All had the same message: coal mining is a dangerous business, and such explosions are part of the risk. The reason why business, government, and union leaders hum the same tune is that for years they have failed miserably to protect the health and safety of the hundreds of thousands of coal miners who work in this country's most dangerous occupation. The miners call this large Farmington, West Virginia coal mine hot, which is their word to describe the existence of gassy or dangerous conditions. Such conditions are preventable, but the mining laws are weak and openly violated. Penalties are almost never assessed for the tens of thousands of significant health and safety violations that occur in most of the 5,400 underground coal mines in this country each year. As for the worst hazard of all, lung disease from breathing coal dust, there are no coal dust standards in existence. Yet 1 out of every 2 coal miners is hit with this very painful, often fatal lung ailment. In September, President Johnson sent to Congress tougher coal mine safety proposals. The senators and representatives from the coal mining states did nothing. The United Mine Workers leadership stayed silent, while the Bituminous Coal Operators Association poured pressure on Congress to ignore the proposals. When it comes to safe working conditions, the coal miners are not really represented, neither by their unions nor by their government. Miners are fatalistic because they see nothing but futility. When they retire, they walk the hills of Appalachia as depleted human beings, broken poor men with collapsing lungs. The stark challenge facing Congress next year is whether it will pass humane legislation with tough penalties for violators, or whether it will allow the coal industry and its governmental and union minions to continue making coal miners cheaper than coal. This is Ralph Nader.
The French franc and devaluation. That report next.
You are in competition with every girl in the world, and you can win if you just watch it a little. What you need is a diet that's so good tasting and so satisfying that you don't necessarily need a will of iron to stay with it. Carnation Slender. You mix Slender with cold, fresh milk. You get a complete, satisfying meal and only 225 calories. Slender, because there's so much competition these days, and because we'd like you to win.
Prepare yourself for a little shock. And some good news if you ever suffer from acid indigestion. This little tablet soothes and cools acid indigestion so effectively, it's hard to believe. It contains one of the most effective medicines ever discovered for acid indigestion. In tests on people at a famous medical center, it neutralized burning stomach acid faster and longer than every leading pill and liquid tested. It worked so well, it's hard to believe. Prepared for a little shock. It's Tums, the medicine that's hard to believe till you take it. Tums, now in peppermint and 4 more flavors.
In Bonn, West Germany today, the richest trading nations, 10 of them, agreed to extend to France nearly $3 billion in loans and credits. This to ease the attack on the franc. There was no official announcement that the franc would be devalued, but devaluation is expected soon, perhaps by tomorrow. The Paris newspaper François went so far as to headline today's editions, "Devaluation of the franc by 10% maximum." For an explanation of just what devaluation is, here is ABC's economic editor, Louis Rukeyser.
Devaluation is a long word for a simple condition. It's what happens to a country when it lives too obviously beyond its means. When that happens, the rest of the world acts just like your local bank would if you did the same thing. It tells that country that its credit is no longer quite as good as it used to be. Politicians always like to pretend that their currency has been devalued because of irresistible outside forces. Those ultra-anonymous Swiss bankers are one favorite villain. And this coming weekend, we can expect to see President de Gaulle pointing his imperious finger at us sinister Americans. But the plain fact is that devaluation is a condition which countries bring on themselves. France was torn last spring by student riots and widespread strikes. To get off the hook, the government agreed to huge pay raises. And then, surprise of surprises, it found that prices went soaring out of control too. In the end, the inflation was so great that French products could no longer compete successfully in world markets. And the inevitable result was the cry for devaluation. Equally, when the British devalued the pound a year ago, they had no one to blame but themselves, though their leaders never quite confessed to this. Again, wages and prices were rising faster than productivity, and eventually they had to devalue. Now they're in trouble again, because they apparently didn't realize that while devaluation may become a necessity, it is never a solution. It's just a warning, and those who ignore it get punished again and again. Why, France has had 14 devaluations already in this century, which may explain why so many Frenchmen hoard gold. The obvious lesson is that nobody is immune from the laws of arithmetic, and there's nothing written in stone that says we Americans are exempt from the threat of devaluation. One of the first problems facing Richard Nixon will be to bring America's inflation under control at home and its spending under control abroad, if the U.S. dollar is not to follow the example of all those francs and pounds whose countrymen thought it could never happen there. This is Louis Rukeyser in New York.
To prevent devaluation of the British pound, the Labour government today raised the already high taxes on cigarettes, beer, and whiskey, and imposed a 10% sales tax on many other items. Stiff restrictions on imports were also put into effect, and prices tumbled on the London stock market. On the New York Stock Exchange today, Dow Jones Industrials were up nearly 2 points. More than 15 million shares were traded. The New York Stock Exchange Index was up 21 cents. On the American Stock Exchange, nearly 8 million shares were traded, and the American Exchange Index was up 20 cents. North Vietnam demands that expanded peace talks begin immediately, without the Saigon delegation. That story in a moment.
In 20 years of auto racing, Andy Granatelli, head of the STP Corporation, has picked up a lot of hardware. And the cars he's brought to the Indy 500, like the revolutionary STP turbine cars, they've taken some hardware too. Friction and wear for mile after pounding mile. That's why Granatelli's cars all have STP oil treatment on their side. STP is the racer's edge. It cuts the friction, cuts the wear, and it cuts the mustard. And not only in Granatelli's cars, most race drivers want STP on their side to keep running racer sharp. Help your family car, old or new, run smoother, cooler, quieter, longer. Have your gasoline station add STP to your oil. STP is the racer's edge.
In Paris today, North Vietnam demanded that the United States begin the expanded peace talks immediately, without representatives of South Vietnam. But the chief spokesman for the Hanoi delegation, Nguyen Thanh Le, did suggest that a seat be kept open for the South Vietnamese. The State Department spokesman said today that the United States is taking a most serious view of continued enemy violations of the demilitarized zone. In Vietnam today, U.S. Marines in the biggest helicopter assault of the war are closing in on an estimated 1,000 enemy troops in an area 13 miles south of Da Nang. So the Marines and South Vietnamese troops have killed about 90 enemy soldiers in the fighting thus far. A car packed with TNT exploded in a crowded marketplace in the Jewish section of Jerusalem today, killing 11 persons and injuring 55 others. Many of the victims were housewives shopping for the weekend. Shops were set afire, cars were wrecked, and the street was cratered. Police cordoned off the Arab sector to prevent angry Jews from taking reprisals. The terrorist attack was the deadliest in the history of Israel. French President Charles de Gaulle observed, but probably didn't celebrate, his 78th birthday anniversary today. He may not have been in a mood to celebrate because of the precarious position of the franc. But anyway, vive de Gaulle and vive la France. A lady jockey hopes to ride in California. That story in a moment.
take half our weekend just to get started.
Hey, Raleigh Filters. Since when?
Since yesterday. I tried Raleigh's and I like the taste. And the coupons are a good idea.
Hey, that is a good taste. Better than what I have been smoking. I think you found a cigarette for me. Is that ours?
I borrowed it from Martha. She got it with Raleigh coupons.
Come to Raleigh Filters. Come to good taste. And remember, the famous Raleigh coupon also comes on light menthol Bel Air.
Bel Air tastes light 'cause the menthol's right. Bel Air tastes light 'cause the menthol's right. Just the right touch of menthol with the white note too.
You get a special kind of lightness when you smoke Bel Air. Special because the menthol's right.
Penny Ann Early plans to leave this weekend for California, where she hopes to ride at Santa Anita Racetrack. Now, a lady jockey has never ridden in a thoroughbred horse race on a major U.S. track. Penny Ann was scheduled to ride at Churchill Downs yesterday, but male jockeys boycotted the race because she was entered, and it had to be called off. They all say they don't want to compete against a woman. ABC's Charles Murphy has the story in Louisville.
Penny Ann Early changed into red and blue silks in the first aid station at Churchill Downs. Her ambition to be a jockey and ride at a major parimutuel track had already brought her farther than any woman before her. She waited for the big moment, the ninth and last race in the jockey quarters. Her horse, named Witness, also a female, had been entered in the fourth race, but the entire field had been moved to last on the program when jockeys refused to sign up for the 11 other mounts. Her determination and the jockey boycott, the first of its kind in racing, were the talk of the track. But the boycott was holding. The jockeys were as determined not to ride with her as she was to ride with them. After the announcement, Penny switched from silks to a miniskirt to meet reporters.
I'm disappointed and disgusted.
Why are you disgusted?
They're calling themselves men, and I have no respect for them anymore, as riders or as males. I've worked with many of them for years, and they were my friends, and they said it's nothing personal, but you have to feel that it's personal.
The stewards at the track did everything they could to stage the race, and the sentiment among the fans was overwhelmingly in Penny's favor. But the odds were against her all along, because not a jockey would ride against her. Charles Murphy, ABC News, at Churchill Downs.
5 years ago today, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. A graveside remembrance and some thoughts on the Kennedy legacy in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Eve, and I live here in the Garden of Eden, and it's really paradise. A lot of these juicy apples hanging around. Did you know that apples make you wise? And an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Anyway, Ocean Spray took a lot of these juicy apples and they stuffed them into this bottle, and they threw in a few little red cranberries, and they shook the stuff up, and they call it Ocean Spray cran-apple juice. Oh, wow. It's great. I know that the cranberries give it a great tang, but really it's largely apple juice. So I don't understand why Ocean Spray calls it cran-apple. Like, I think that it should be called apple cran, right? Ocean Spray ought to wise up.
Today, on the 5th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, members of the family attended memorial mass. At Arlington National Cemetery, thousands climbed the hillside to pass the president's graveside. Through the morning chill, all day, and into the evening, they came past the grave in eternal flame that marks it. As he's done every year since the assassination, President Johnson sent a wreath. Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Robinson, a White House military aide, brought the red and white carnations and the blue cornflowers and placed them at graveside as another colonel saluted and the people watched respectfully. Official mission accomplished, the colonels paid their own respects to the fallen commander. Twice today, once in the early morning and again in the afternoon, Senator Edward Kennedy visited Arlington. In the morning, his wife and some of the Kennedy children were with him. In the afternoon, he came to mourn alone. Today, John F. Kennedy was remembered, very much remembered. Now, Frank Reynolds has some thoughts about John Kennedy and his brother Robert.
5 years ago today, the pain, the hurt, the outrage all flood back, and that's the way it ought to be. Time may smooth the rough edges of sorrow, but it does nothing to diminish the depth of the loss this country sustained 5 years ago. There is certainly no need to worry that the memory of this young man will fade, even though there are children alive now who know him only as Bobby's brother, who also was shot. That's the way one 5-year-old described him to me last June. The steady line of patient people moving through the hills of Arlington, however, every day, rain or shine, leave no doubt that John Kennedy's eternal flame burns as brightly now as ever, and will, hopefully, for generations to come. 5 years does make possible an unemotional appraisal of his presidency, and it must be said there are those who find it unimpressive in certain respects. His 1,000 days produced no great tide of landmark legislation. The Congress was not receptive to all his ideas. But the effectiveness of a presidency, as indeed of a life, cannot be measured solely in charts and graphs of things done and not done. And I sometimes think that President Kennedy's greatest gift to his country was a sense of concern, of involvement. He was, above all, the unremitting, untiring enemy of apathy. This same intolerance of indolence, this unwillingness to settle for the status quo, was certainly the hallmark of Robert Kennedy's life, especially after November of 1963. As always, we honor them both best by emulating their best, and that was not to be found in their style or grace or wit, but in their concern and compassion. This is Frank Reynolds.
And that's tonight's News and Comment. I'm Sam Donaldson. Frank Reynolds will be back on Monday. Good night.
Special thanks this week to stations WTAE-TV Pittsburgh, WLBW-TV Miami, KGO-TV San Francisco, KABC-TV Los Angeles, and KHVH-TV Honolulu for their help in preparing reports from their areas. Monday through Friday in color, the ABC Evening News with Frank Reynolds. Mississippi Democrat John Stennis, chairman of the Senate Preparedness Subcommittee, will be the guest Sunday on ABC's Issues and Answers at 1:30 Eastern, 12:30 Central Time. This has been a presentation of ABC News.